Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. With BronxNet about to celebrate its 30th anniversary, we took a look back at our programs from 10 years ago. To kick us off, we will start with Freddie. In March of 2013, former Bronx Borough President Fernando Ferrer appeared on Bronx Talk. He visited the program to discuss his role as acting chairman of the MTA, a post he held for 6 months that year. So here is Freddie Ferrer from 2013. Take a look.
A funny thing happened to you on the way to retirement, I guess. How did you become the chair of the MTA? I know you were on the board, but then all of a sudden the fickle finger of fate said you.
Well, first of all, at 62, I hardly consider myself retirement ready. Still have a lot of interest in a great many things, a great job with a great firm. Mercury, still involved in voluntary activities like my membership on the Regional Plan Association board. Then Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez suggested to Governor Cuomo that he nominate me to the MTA board. I thought that was the kind of thing I wanted to do. I've been offered, look, I've had friends who've been governor before, and they wanted me to get into state government, but nothing really interested me. The MTA board did. It's an opportunity to really make an impact in the lives of millions of people who use our system every day in a variety of different ways. So on the board for a while, became vice chairman pretty quickly. And then within a day or two, the then CEO, Joe Lhota, announces his resignation. He's going to run for mayor. See, I did it the other way. And then I become acting chairman. Been acting chairman for nearly 3 months, enjoying every moment of it, although it's a lot more balls to keep in the air. But for a guy like me, who's got public service genes in his DNA, it's a wonderful opportunity to continue public service in a different way, and really a high privilege, as high a privilege as you get.
I could understand the joy that you would get in representing the borough of the Bronx, which of course you've done for a long time.
Well, in our entire 19-county region.
In the MTA, but then the responsibility of managing it from the top. Is this something that you relish and you welcome, and you'd say, gee whiz, now I'm acting, I'd like to be ultimately appointed permanently? Or are you saying, you know what, eventually, okay, now I'm going to step back and let somebody else do it?
No, I don't want to be chairman and CEO. I've made that very clear from the start. Never applied for it. No one ever offered me the job. I have every reason to believe Governor Cuomo will shortly nominate a very qualified individual to lead the MTA. That individual will have my complete support when I drop back down to vice chairman. And I look forward to working with them on important projects that I'm still interested in, like Metro North access along the East Bronx, from Co-op City to Hunts Point, right down to Penn Station. Then, of course, the extending of the 2nd Avenue subway north.
I ran into you on the subway once, twice, I can't even remember, a few times. Do you still take the train to go downtown?
Sure.
You do? And is there anything that an MTA chair can learn about the subways or can bring to the table if he actually rides the trains every day?
Subways, Metro North, buses, variety of different subway lines, variety of different bus lines. You get to see a lot, and people tell you a lot. So, for example, one morning I'm catching the BX10, and some neighbors of mine are there and recognize me, say hi, and they tell me about bus time, that new app that you can put on your phone. That because in the Bronx and Staten Island, and pretty soon the entire city, because of GPS, you'll be able to get the exact time when that bus will arrive at your stop. Means you don't have to wait in the awful cold or wet rain for a bus. You'll know when it is. You can time your walk right to the bus stop. They tell me it works great.
I was going to ask, so what did they tell you? Did they tell you they like it? They
love it.
They love it.
Not like it, love it.
I can understand how that could be a tremendous help, because even if the wait is 3 to 5 minutes, if you don't know, that 3 to 5 minutes is interminable. If you know and you can pretty much count it down, then that is worthwhile. Did you think it was a good idea to take the express buses, which were privatized and many people felt were running reasonably efficient, and then incorporate that and publicize them, as it were, and make them part of the MTA?
When there was a board of estimate, we, and then as later on as borough president over the Bronx franchises, we managed the entire private bus franchise program for the entire city. A lot of lines, some of them awful, some of them mediocre. The two in the Bronx, superb. New York Bus Service and Liberty Lines, no one had a complaint about them.
Which is why I'm asking the question.
They ran on time. They ran well. Mayor decided he wanted to acquire all of their assets and turn them over to the MTA to manage. And that's exactly what they did under a unique agreement. Preceded my time on the board. Do I think we did ourselves a service by getting rid of some of those horrible bus operators in Brooklyn and in Queens? Oh, you bet. They were just terrible. People were writing letters of complaint, calling in complaints all the time. Did it take with it two very good services? And so there is some debate about whether they're as good as they used to be. I don't know. But I can tell you this. The ones that were in Brooklyn and Queens have improved exponentially just because they were so awful to start with.
Well, I'd have to plead ignorance on that because I'm, of course, a Bronxite, and I could tell you about New York Bus Service and Liberty Lines. Is the MTA able to manage it, taking on a burden like that?
Yeah. I mean, we do it. We do it well. It's part of our New York City Transit operation. We have a separate bus company that manages our city buses and our MTA buses, the so-called express buses and special buses. Works fine. We have a really first-rate president, Darrell Irick, who's also from the Bronx, from the Northeast Bronx, and a good guy.
Let's talk about that Metro North idea. From the time that you were borough president, you had heard about alienation in Co-op City. We're isolated. Transportation in and out of the city is always an issue, and it's always been an issue for people in Co-op City. How close are we to making it happen? There certainly seems to be an inertia pushing it forward. What are the issues, and what will it take to ultimately line those rails?
Well, there is a momentum pushing that forward, and I'll tell you how it develops. This isn't the new idea. In fact, it's a very old idea. Penn Access, or access into Manhattan along that Metro North line, was an original iteration of the full-length 2nd Avenue subway. Well, that was not meant to be. But we always had a plan for those 4 stations to try to get into Manhattan and help the residents of Co-op City, Morris Park, Parkchester, and Hunts Point in not only getting into Manhattan efficiently and affordably, but making the reverse commute, getting jobs in Westchester County and in Connecticut just as efficiently and just as affordably. We've been building support for it. They're in EIS, Environmental Impact Review, right now, those 4 stations, and we expect that we'll be introducing them in short order for the new capital plan, and we're talking with legislative leaders and the governor about that right now.
In our second segment of this look back to 10 years ago, we got into what was a surprise to many in the political community when former borough president Adolofo Carrion Jr. became the independent party's candidate for mayor. So here he is 10 years ago, former Bronx Borough President Adolofo Carrion Jr. on Bronx Talk.
As I was walking in, I had these feelings of the old shows we used to do and the appearances we made here. A lot of great memories, and it's good to be home in the Bronx. And I see the Halbin painting as the backdrop and the Harlem River and the views of the Bronx. It's good to be home.
We're always moving forward. And as I said to you, you're one of the only guests. I didn't have to say where the studio was or where you had to go. You knew it pretty well.
I found it.
Anyway, let's get right into it. Let's talk about the campaign for mayor. And I'll just ask in plain Bronx, like, what is, in Bronx language, what is this about? Just a few weeks ago, your successor, Ruben Diaz Jr., was here and sitting in that seat. He said he was disappointed that the former borough president had turned his back on the Democratic Party, saying that was the party that gave him his career in politics. He was a council member, borough president, even worked for a Democratic president. But you sought the Republican nomination for mayor and are running as an independent. So really, what is this about?
You know what, Gary, it's not really about turning my back to a party that I respect. And obviously, you know, the socially progressive principles and ideals that the Democratic Party represents, I embrace, but I'm also a fiscal conservative. But more importantly, I've always been independent and about results and about innovation and about creative governance. And unfortunately, I think that the two-party system is failing the public. It's failing to reform our education system. It's failing to create a business-friendly environment for businesses to grow jobs in our local economy. And frankly, you know, I'm reflecting, I think, what the voters are feeling, this feeling of disconnect between their reality to educate their kids, to grow the economy, to ensure that they create progress for their families, that there's integration of immigrants into our society, and that they can climb up the ladder as quickly as possible. You know, my parents arrived from Puerto Rico in the 1950s to New York City. They lived the West Side Story. You know, it was not as romantic as the stage presentation of the West Side Story. It was rough. But in less than one generation, they went from poverty to the middle class. They went from living in a sub-basement on South 2nd Street in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, to owning a home in the Northeast Bronx. That city has to continue to operate for everybody who comes here. People come here from all over the world, from all over the country, and they come to New York City because it's a city of commerce and it's a city of opportunity, or certainly it represents itself as a city of opportunity. What we unfortunately have seen in my lifetime and in your lifetime is we're growing hollow in the middle. We're not growing the middle class. We have a city of rich and poor, and fewer people are entering the middle class and being able to afford to live in this city. So I made a very serious and calculated decision in my life after having served in political office as a Democrat to say, you know what, we have to call the question on the assumptions that the parties carry about the constituency. The Democratic Party has largely ignored my community, the Hispanic community. They've taken us for granted, basically saying, oh, you know, they're always going to be there. The Republican Party has essentially ignored that vote, the African-American vote, the Hispanic vote. So what we have is people who have lost their ability to engage in the political process because they have lost their currency, their ability to influence the process by virtue of their vote. So it's really calling the question on the parties to say, let's listen to the voters. The loyalty should be to the voters and the people, not to the parties.
There are many Democrats in the Bronx. I'm sure many of those who are still your friends.
Overwhelmingly Democratic, yes.
Who would
All of them are my
raise
friends.
an eyebrow to hear you say, well, gee whiz, the Democratic Party hasn't supported the Hispanic people. And certainly the Hispanic vote was vital in making Barack Obama a president once again.
It certainly did. And in fact, 71% of the Hispanic vote across the country went to President Obama. And that was a good thing. But that's national politics, and that you have to spread it across the 50 states of the union when, you know, all politics is local. And then at the end of the day, when you look at the condition of communities here and you ask, are you better off? Are we getting better education results? Are we climbing up the economic ladder? Do more people own homes and own businesses and are able to show the wealth on their bottom line? The fact is that that's not the case. In terms of the health outcomes and the wellness outcomes in communities all across the city, you have to ask yourself the question, are you better off? What I want to do, Gary, is in the time that I have left in my political career is to really call the question on the political parties and say, are we about the people or are we about party dogma?
Would it have been one step too far? Now, you were not successful in receiving the Republican nomination. If you, I mean, it would seem to many people to be extremely discordant to say, wow, Adolfo Carrion Jr. with the, now we have the I next to your name, but with the R next to your name. Wouldn't that have been going one step too far out of the realm that you grew up in, the realm, you say your parents came to this country, et cetera, et cetera? Wouldn't that have been going one step too far?
Many Democrats are independent, many Republicans are independent. People want to be independent-minded and make judgments about candidates and who they support based on ideas and based on their own interests. Unfortunately, what has happened is many people will vote to toe the line on party dogma. And look, the fact is we have, in 2009, only 3 in 10 voters came out to vote for mayor. The lowest level of voter participation since 1969. And the trajectory has been a steady downward. There is a disconnect. People don't participate. They don't believe that their vote matters. Look, just, the last term of the mayor was, something that really angered people because, he violated or went against the will of the people. It's time for political leaders to demonstrate courage, go against the tide, and work for the people's interest, not the party interest.
Can you win this? The controller, the public advocate, the city council speaker, and even the former controller who was narrowly defeated in the last mayoral election, all have nice platforms to run from. What's it going to take? Are you looking at a runoff and that's the way that I really have to win this? The numbers for you as an independent against that very formidable set of opponents don't seem to play out.
Well, in fact, it's a perfect storm to have a three-way race. And let me just, to set the record straight in terms of how we engaged with the Republicans in a conversation, I declared that I was going to be an independent back in October of last year, and the Republicans caught wind of it, and they thought, wow, we have an opportunity to do what we did with Mike Bloomberg, which is to create a fusion candidacy where the voters have been 5 times over. And so, in fact, the voters have demonstrated that they're willing to vote outside their what I consider their political comfort zone and vote their best interests. They were voting for education reform. They were voting for an independent executive that would call the shots as he saw them. They were voting for a safer city. They were voting for pro-growth. My platform from the time that I ran as a member of the city council, a candidate for city council, and when I ran for borough president, what I said to the folks was the best social program is a job. We have to grow the economy. And if we grow the economy, we create jobs and we create the economic ladder that we all came here in the first place to climb. So the dissonance of a fiscal conservative and a social progressive is where New Yorkers are. New Yorkers are socially progressive and fiscally responsible and conservative. They don't want to go back to the city of the 1970s that went broke and became a dangerous place.
Our final segment for tonight features another former borough president who was rumored to be a mayoral candidate, but ultimately decided not to run for mayor. Ruben Diaz Jr. has the distinction of being the most frequent guest we've had in the program. He's been here more than 30 times. And in this case, in 2013, he had just completed his State of the Borough address. Let's take a look.
Last week, we gave our 4th State of the Borough address. This is the opportunity for me to speak to Bronxites and community leaders as to what has transpired from my office and working with leaders all over the borough and the city over the last 12 months, and what our vision is for the next year. I couldn't do that and do it in a way where it was live on television. If it were not for BronxNet,
There you
if
go.
it were not for the wonderful team that was here. I just want to thank Max and Derek Woods and the entire BronxNet team here. I just want to give a special shout out to Helen for working the teleprompters as well. And so, I think it's fitting to let the world know that the group and the team here, we could put them up against anybody else for that type of production.
Well, I would have to echo that sentiment because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for all those people and the fine work they do. But let's get to the meat of the matter.
Among the many things that we talked about, I think the news of the day was the gun crime registry, which when you look at the gun conversation, the gun debate, gun control, gun regulation, gun reform, this is on everybody's lips nationwide, from the president on down. And, here in the Bronx, we've been able to do a lot of great things working with the NYPD, working with community leaders. In fact, one of the things I highlighted was that last year was our best year in homicides and shootings and shooting victims since 1963. But we still got to keep going because anytime anyone gets shot, whether it's one, just one person, that's too many. Well, we do the Peace in Our Streets, buyback program, gun legislation. I even introduced something, a resolution at the pension board to study how is it that pension dollars are being invested and whether or not they are fueling gun sales and gun profits. So the one thing that we brought out was why not have a gun registry? A gun crime registry. Essentially, it would work as like the sex offenders registry list. If you are someone who has been convicted of a gun crime, and what you need to do before you come out of jail is sign forms and register with your local law enforcement as to where you're working, where you live. And I believe that law-abiding citizens, we should know who among us are the ones that are perpetrating gun crimes. And I think it's been a great hit. We're talking to legislators up in Albany and the city council to see how is it that we take this idea now and cross the T's, dot the I's, and really look at the details and present it into law.
So this becomes something that would have to come out of the state of New York.
We could do it both ways. I would like to see it statewide.
I'm assuming you might even want it to be nationwide.
I would love to see it nationwide. I think, when you look at New York State, we have always proven to be the leaders in how our legislature with the governor of the state of New York, we've been the leaders, and a lot of other states really look to us whenever progressive or whenever cutting edge legislation is passed. But even in New York City in 2006, Councilman Peter Vallone, he did a registry. It's law now in New York City, but this registry is only for the eyes of the police department. And so what we're also doing is speaking to him and members of the city council to see how we amend the city ordinance and include it so that people can look at this, the public can look at this online the same like that we do sex offenders.
When I heard it at the State of the Borough speech, I said to myself, wouldn't the borough president be in a better position to do that if he was in his former life as a legislator? In other words, you introduce it as a bill, you introduce it as law, you lobby it. But here you're kind of like trying to do it as an advocate more than really as a legislator. Is that accurate?
Well, I had a great run in my almost 13 years.
I'm not asking you to go back there.
and we were effective up there. But I think that when you look at the borough presidency and what we've been able to do over the last 4 years, and this is something I wanted to highlight in my State of the Borough, is that we haven't made it about, a ceremonial position where you're just cutting ribbons or you're doing groundbreakings. We have introduced legislation in the city council. We have the living wage, the New York Fair Wages for New Yorkers Act that was introduced at my behest. And, we're thinking now of legislation that we have in hearings in April on having a health impacts statement or study whenever you're developing a project. And so this is also another way for us. And what's benefited me as a former legislator are the relationships and the reputation and the camaraderie and the collegiality that I was able to develop. So I think it allows me as the borough president, even though I'm not a legislator, to be able to facilitate that, whether it's in the New York City Council or up in the state legislature.
What did you think of the Journal News up in Westchester publicizing the names and addresses of gun owners? They did it so that this were legal gun owners, of course, but just to show where all the permits were held. Is that the kind of thing you think, maybe that'd be a way of at least identifying the scope of the gun issue in the borough of the Bronx or even in New York City?
I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but I think when you look at those who have been opponents of gun reform, I think this is the perfect piece of legislation that everyone could get around. Why? Because we are addressing those who have committed crimes. And so while a lot of folks make the argument of infringing upon law-abiding citizens' Second Amendment rights, what this piece of legislation does is say, you know what? We're not talking about law-abiding citizens. We're talking about those who had a gun and committed a crime with it. I think we all have the right to know. And I'm hopeful that, again, those who have been always saying no, no, no to some level of reform can appreciate this piece of legislation. I think that when you look at different, crimes, there are some crimes that rise above the level of many others. For instance, that's the reason why we have hate crime. Separate. This is the reason why we have sex offender registry. I think that when you look at gun violence, homicides at the hands of guns, I think that this raises to that level.
Interesting op-ed piece in the Daily News a little while back. I think it was right after the tragedy in Connecticut, and former police commissioner Howard Safer, I thought it was interesting coming from him, suggested that we do annual license renewal for gun owners, much like we do a license renewal for you as a driver of an automobile, so that a gun owner then has to simply go in, show that he or she is still a law-abiding citizen, show how the gun has been used, if at all, during the year. You like that idea?
I do. Look, I don't see why any Bronxite, any New Yorker, any American for that matter, feels the need to even have a gun. So I'm one of those who classifies himself as extremely progressive on gun issues. It's a sick mentality that America has, something that we have to deal with. And I think that any contribution to this conversation can help. I mean, think of having on an annual basis, folks prove the fact that they're still worthy of having a gun license. But at the same time, perhaps we should even put in there that we should know exactly what has happened if they still have the guns that they purchased.
Well, you would have to show how many times you've used it, or
whether you still have it, or if not, what did you do with it?
Well, you mentioned it during your State of the Borough. What is the Bronx Reentry Task Force? To me, that sounded like a good idea, because we have many recidivists, and this is a good way of getting people integrated in society. How would that work?
Well, we've been doing a number of things around the population of Bronxites who have found themselves in trouble in the past. And while we want to get rid of criminals and we want to put those that are the most violent behind bars, at the same time, we want to make sure that those are coming home get the necessary services that they need. We've been able to put in an application, we meaning my office, we put in an application and we won a grant by the Department of Criminal Justice Services. And the Reentry Task Force is a task force where we're working with community leaders and organizations to make sure that those that come home, we're able to provide workforce development for them, that we're able to make sure that they get the necessary medical services they need, whether it's mental health or other things, dental coverage. In fact, one of the things that I spoke about in my State of the Borough address was how when the state of New York wanted to divest itself of different correctional facilities, the Fulton Correctional Facility was one of them. And instead of turning it over or putting an RFP so a developer could come in and do more housing, one of the things that we were able to do, thanks to Senator Gustavo Rivera, Ruth Hazel Thompson, Helen Foster, and Eric Stevenson, and my office, is that we were able to make the case that we should turn this over into a one-stop shop. So we're working with different organizations to have this as a facility where the Entry Task Force and community leaders and community organizations can make sure that we welcome those folks back. I also believe that when you look at us being the borough with the highest unemployment rate, you really can't seriously address that without addressing that population that's coming back home.
So that's our look back to 2013, 10 years ago. We want to thank our current producer, Rebecca Hemick, and our previous producer who produced all those segments is Jane Filoro. Our director for this program is Nick Marrero. We have a cast of thousands working around us in the studio, and we'll see you next week. Good night.